Hi, my name is Jerry Hanley. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. I'm from Covenant Community Church, and what we're doing today is I'm going to make my squash dressing for you. I've had a lot of people ask me how to make it, and so today that's what we're going to do. Excuse me, so I'm going to wash my hands so we get started, because the first thing we're going to do requires me to use my hands. So what I've done, I've already made my cornbread. You can make your cornbread up ahead of time. Under my cake plate over there is the 3 I'm going to use for next Wednesday. So you can always go ahead and make your cornbread up. And what you want to do is you want to crumble your cornbread up real fine so that you don't have any chunks in it. Now what I do is you can use your basic cornbread recipe if you have one. If you don't, they provide one on the back of the cornmeal bag. I use White Lily or Martha White cornmeal, and you just want to follow the Southern cornbread recipe. And what you're going to do is you're going to get it real fine. Now I used one 9-inch skillet of cornbread, and to that we're going to add some loaf bread to give it some texture, so that we don't all just have cornbread in it. Now, I'm out of loaf bread, but I'm going to use hot dog buns. They work the same way. I've done that before. So like I said, this will require your hands. You've got to get in there and really get it crumbled up. When you cook your cornbread, I don't cook mine till it gets totally brown on the top. Just make sure it's done, because you don't want any hard pieces of cornbread in your dressing. Also, what I've already done is I've cooked off my squash. I have it here. Now with this, I did squash and my onions, and I cooked them together in a little bit of butter and chicken broth. And then I also cooked some chicken broth. I took some chicken thighs and put some seasoning and butter in them, and I've cooked my own chicken broth. And I reserved the water from the squash liquid in case I need some more to make the dressing a little bit more moist, because you want your dressing to be moist. What you're going to need also is you're going to need a can of cream of celery or a cream of mushroom soup, whichever you like. Most people that I cook this for do not like mushrooms, so we're using cream of celery. You will need 2 eggs, and you will need a half a sleeve of crackers and your seasonings. Now to this bowl of seasoning, I have a half a tablespoon of sage, I have a half a tablespoon of poultry seasoning, and I have a teaspoon of salt and a teaspoon of pepper. Now, when I make squash dressing, I don't put as much sage and as much poultry seasoning as I do when I'm making chicken dressing or turkey dressing, because I want the squash flavor to come through with it. So, as you get your cornbread cooked, and you can cook your chicken or your stock. Now I do know people that use canned stock or bottled stock. You can do that as well if you don't have time, but you can always cook your chicken off early. Now if you'll notice, this is what your cornbread needs to look like. You want it to be very fine when you start. Okay? Now the next thing we're going to do is our bread. You can do it 2 ways. Now I took these out and I let them get kind of a little stale overnight. So you can cut them this way, or you can pull them apart. Whichever you want to do is fine. But you want to go ahead and get your bread and your crackers and your things like that in there first. But you can slice them or you can pull them apart. If I was using regular sliced bread, I would use about 4 to 5 slices in that. And then what I will do is still pull them apart some when I'm putting them in here. And one of the things, if you'll notice, I have a lot of spoons out here, because when I'm tasting my dressing to make sure I have the right amount of flavor in it, I'll use a spoon every time I taste it. I don't like to double dip. So even though it's for family or it's going to be cooked, I don't do that. And you do want to taste your dressing before you put your eggs in it. Because raw eggs, you're not supposed to eat them, even though we've been eating cake batter for years with raw eggs in it when our grandparents and parents would cook the cake batter, but still I like to not taste it with this. Okay, now I'm going ahead and add a half a sleeve of crackers, to which you want to crumble those up very well as well. And what I do is just kind of crumble them in the sleeve, so you really don't have to get them out. Now let's see, we're going to do half of the sleeve. I've got a little bit more than that, but you want to make sure those are crumbled up. And if some flies on the floor, it's okay. We can always sweep when we're through. I hope everyone's planning a good Thanksgiving. I know with this pandemic, it's going to be all different for us this year, and we may not be able to get together with our family like we want to. And hopefully, God's all blessed us and that we've come through this, and hopefully we're going to have a new beginning. So the next thing I'm going to do is add my seasonings to this. And I want to stir this up. Now, I'm using my hands right now. That's the best way to mix this up for me, is to do that. That's why I keep my hands in dishwater while I'm cooking. It's because that's the best way to make up your dressing, is going to be with your hands. Okay. Now, if you'll see that, it's very crumbly. And that's what you're wanting here. You want it to be very crumbly. Okay? All right. Now the next thing we're going to add is our squash. And like I said, I cooked my squash and onions together this morning in a little bit of butter and a little bit of chicken broth and some salt and pepper. That's why I don't put any more salt and pepper in my dressing until I get it all mixed up, because your chicken broth has a lot of sodium in it, especially if you use store-bought that already is seasoning. Now you're going to take your hands and you're going to mix that in there thoroughly like that. And we're mixing our seasoning and our squash in there together. Okay. And it is kind of wet, but it's not as wet as it's going to need to be. Okay? So, let me wash my hands just a minute. Then I'm going to get our chicken broth. Now I have about, I would say about 6 cups of chicken broth in here. We're going to add this a little at the time to see how much we're going to need. So I'm going to use my 1 cup measure. This is 1. This is 2, 3, and 4. So we're going to try that to start with and see if that's enough liquid in here. Now it's not, but what we're going to go ahead and do now is we're going to add our can of soup to it. I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then to this, which I forgot to get out, excuse me just a minute, I'm going to put a half of a can of milk in there. Sorry, just a minute. Jimmy had cereal this morning, we buried the milk. So we're going to put a half of a can of milk to this. And what this is going to do, this not only binds it, but it's also going to make your soup real good and creamy. Now you see the consistency of it here. It still is a little too dry because we want it to be really moist. So what we're going to do now is we're going to add, I'm going to add 1 more cup of chicken broth to it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a cup of the broth off of the squash that I cooked. Let's see, that's about a half. I'm going to put 1 more. Let's see. I think that's going to... And you just want to make sure that it's all mixed in there good for you. And I'm going to add about a half a cup of the squash broth to this, and that's going to make it just right. And like I said, you can use canned squash. I use fresh squash in this because I happened to find some yesterday at the store. Canned squash, if you use your canned squash, just remember to go through it because sometimes it has like chunks in it that are real hard and they will not cook out. So you want to make sure that you go through it first and examine them. And what I still do, even though if I use canned, I saute it with a little butter in the skillet with my onions. Another thing you can do is if you like celery, you can saute celery and put in it. I don't like to use a lot of celery in mine because I want the squash flavor to come out. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to taste it and just see what the seasonings are like. Okay, that's perfect. It's got enough salt in it and enough seasoning in it. Excuse me. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to break my eggs in it. Like I said, you're going to use 2 eggs. You know, we have a joke here. The first time Jamie saw me break some eggs up, there was no shell in them. And he said, "Wow, your eggs don't have any shell in them." I said, "Well, because the recipe doesn't call for that." So that's kind of a joke with us when he sees me doing something in the kitchen. And what you're going to do is you just want to whip your eggs up. Okay, then you're going to put them into your dressing, and that's going to make it even more rich and will help bind it as well. Okay, and we're going to stir this up. You want to make sure you get it stirred up really well. And at this point in time, we're not going to taste it anymore because we've already tasted it, so we know it's going to be good. Okay. Okay, so what I did prior was I took a casserole dish now, and this one is a 13 by 12, or 13 by 9, I'm sorry. It may be a little too big, but I don't like my dressing real thick. So it may be a little bit thin than you normally make, but my other Pyrex dish is not here. But I went ahead and buttered it, the Pyrex dish. Now what you're going to do is, wash my hands again. What you're going to do is, this is where I do put it in by hand, because I want to show you a little secret. This is how you're going to know if your dressing has enough Well, it is going to work. Your dressing has enough, and this is with cornbread dressing or squash dressing. Any dressing that you make, you'll know if you have enough moisture in it and it's not going to turn out dry. So you're going to take your hand, and I just washed mine, and the drying towels that I'm using, I got them all out clean this morning, so they're all clean. What you're going to do is you're going to take your hand and you're going to do like this. Now, do you see how that gives? That means you have enough broth or enough liquid in your dressing, okay? And that means it's going to turn out delicious. So what we've done is we've preheated the oven to 350. Normally this takes between, I would say 30 to 45 minutes. I will let you know an exact time. We are going to come back when I take it out of the oven so you can see how it looks, okay? So we're going to pop that in the oven now, and we'll be back with you in just a minute, okay? We're going to set our timer. I'm going to go ahead and set the timer for 30 minutes, and then we'll check it. 45, and I'll check it in about 30 minutes and see what it says. Hey guys, welcome back. This is Jerry again. We took our dressing out of the oven. I want you to see what it looks like, and this is the way that I know it's done. Just a future thing, it did take almost 45 minutes to an hour. I hadn't made this in a while, so you just want to make sure you get a good brown on it. And this is the way I know that it's done. If you'll notice, it's starting to crack right here, so that tells me it's done. Now you may want yours a little bit more brown, and then in the middle is solid. If you'll notice, this is solid right here, and it's got a good crust on the side. So I think you'll enjoy this. Another thing I wanted to tell you is if you wanted to make this a main dish, you could also add some chicken to this and make chicken casserole. This would turn into a casserole. You don't just have to have dressing, on Thanksgiving, Christmas, or a holiday. So we want to thank you for joining us today. I know you're going to enjoy this, and hopefully we'll see you with some more dishes in the future.